Yes. Yes. Wow. Thank you very much for coming, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our Polish colleagues to this audience. The session we are going to have today is about presenting the results of a cooperation project we have had with the Polish Institute of International Affairs in Warsaw that has been funded by a generous grant from the Polish-Norwegian bilateral fund that is a part of the EEA grant scheme. And we decided to look at the connection between two aspects where Polish and Norwegian interests are somehow overlapping. Partly, at least it's our impression that they may be overlapping. And the idea was to look at the connection between defense and energy-related questions. And this report is a result of more than 1 year-long cooperation between those two institutes. This is also something that is a part of a longer history of cooperation between our institutes. Between 2014 and 2016, we had also another type of broader cooperation on governance-related issues. So it's, again, my pleasure to welcome you at this conference, at this small seminar where we plan to present the main conclusions from the report and to put this into a kind of broader context. And then this presentation is going to be followed by discussion, and we will also have a panel where leading Polish and Norwegian experts working on those issues are going to share their views with you, and you will also be given an opportunity to ask even the most difficult questions related to those issues. Now I would like to give the floor to Marcin Terlikowski, who has been coordinating this project on the PISM side, and he is going to give you some ideas about the background and about the topics that we have touched upon in this project. And this is going to be followed by two presentations by Wojciech Lorenz and myself, and then we will have some time for questions and answers before we will go to this panel session. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakub. As you said, my name is Marcin Terlikowski. I'm head of international security program here at the Polish Institute of International Affairs, and here at NUPI. It's already 5th or 6th time where I have the privilege to be guest of Jakub and his colleagues and director Svedrup. And this is indeed a sign of something what is I would say even a structural cooperation between our two institutes made possible by the EEA grants, Norway grants. So. The reason we met here today is a research project, which Jakub mentioned, of over 1 year-long research project. Was looking at the defense and energy issues in the Nordic-Baltic region. And I have task today to moderate the presentation of the panel, the presentation of the report by two of its co-authors, Wojciech Lorenz, who is senior analyst in the Defense International Security Program at PISM, focusing mainly on NATO and the defense intelligence in the region, and Jakub Godzimilski, representing NUPI in this project, who was focusing mostly on energy issues in the region, and then the connection between the energy issues and Russian policies in the region. So my role within the next hour will be humble. I will just try to keep the authors stick to the time, so we can have more time for discussions. But before we jump into the presentation, the discussion, let me say 2-3 words about the project and its fruit, the report which you hopefully have in your hands. If not, there are copies outside. You can take them. Please do. This is why we published it. Well, the report was co-authored by a larger group of people. Others who couldn't come here are Dr. Alexandra Gawlikowska-Fyk, head of Energy and International Economic Relations Program in PISM, Artur Kacprzyk, analyst dealing with NATO and U.S. defense policy in PISM International Security Program, and sitting here Bartosz Bieliszczuk, who is energy analyst. He will be in the second panel. So this is by no means a group report. This is a result of a number of seminars and trips which we undertook last year to Norway, but also to Brussels, to the NATO headquarters, so we could discuss about NATO adaptation. We went to Stavanger. Some of us went to Stavanger to learn more about the current situation as regards energy exports by Norway and the prospects for that and significance for the region and for the European gas market. We organized a kick-off seminar around a year ago here in Oslo in NUPI, which was very interesting, and we were privileged to have members of both Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Ministries of Defense of both Poland and Norway. We organized 2 seminars in Warsaw to discuss our findings. And in March, we are kind of harvesting the fruits of this work, presenting the report and its thesis. And as you can see already in the title of the presentation, the title of the report, the research is now structured around the notion about the thesis that in the Nordic-Baltic region, the energy issues and the defense issues are highly interconnected. The energy issues mean basically the energy choices of the member states of NATO, of the EU in the region. So the choices regarding their energy mix and their import mixes. Defense issues are linked to, of course, the NATO deterrence and defense policy. We haven't had this approach from the beginning. We're looking at these 2 questions, these 2 research issues separately. But in the course of all these meetings, which I mentioned, seminars, research trips, we found that these 2 dimensions of security are indeed heavily linked in the region, and one affects the other on both political, strategic, if you wish, level, and on a tactical, operational level. And how does this link looks like? We will discuss in the presentation. So I will not take more time than needed, and I invite Wojciech for the presentation of the report.
Thank you very much. I have more or less 15 minutes and 6 slides, and we'll try to be brief to show you what is the strategic situation, why it is different than it was during the Cold War, obviously, what was the thinking during the Cold War about the status quo and energy. And everybody who knows a little bit of history knows that USSR during the Cold War was rather interested in strengthening the status quo in Europe, and it was interested in keeping Germany divided and weak as long as possible. At the same time, USSR had a huge conventional superiority over NATO countries, so it based its strategy on the ability to launch a massive conventional offensive operation against Western Europe. It was a mixture of deterrence and coercion. At that time, obviously, the flaming point could be a divided Berlin. And the first line of defense would be Western Germany. Obviously, from the German perception, because they were the main country that was responsible for conventional deterrence, and they were threatened most by this massive conventional offensive. They calculated that energy cooperation would not impede their defense because they wouldn't be susceptible to energy blackmail. It was in their vital interest to defend their country. So if something terrible happened, if there was war, they calculated that the blackmail will not be an issue. And this opened the way to this kind of thinking that through closer cooperation, energy cooperation with the USSR, we can broaden the sphere of common interests and limit the risk of confrontation. And it worked well. There was no risk that energy blackmail would divide NATO, at least not in Europe. It was an issue between Europe and the United States, but not on the European theater. Of course, after the Cold War, we have a completely different strategic situation. Russia interprets status quo in Europe in a different way than the Western countries. It tries to regain the status of the regional power and world power. And the way to achieve this is through reintegration of former republics. It is also focused on maintaining the military buffer zone in our region along the borders of NATO and EU member states. And of course, it promotes the security architecture, which is based on the concert of powers concept or concert of Europe, which I will briefly show in a while. But we, for this report, we analyzed the evolution of the Russian military doctrine, which clearly I will cut short and will not refer to all those documents that are mentioned here. But the major conclusion is that Russia, with much weaker conventional potential than it used to have during the Cold War, it tries to base its deterrence coercion strategy again on the ability to go out of its own territory and wage war behind its borders. These days, it wouldn't be a massive conventional offensive. This is not this kind of threat, but it would be a limited local war with the threat of escalating to regional war. And once it escalates to regional war, then Russia demonstrates that it would be able to use nuclear weapons to de-escalate the conflict. And this is what we could see, which was tested during the Zapad exercises in 1999, 2009, 2013, and 2017. You could see that there is a similar pattern that usually conflict starts in the Baltic Sea region, then it escalates to Kaliningrad and Belarus. Belarus in Russian doctrine is treated exactly in the same way as Russian territory, so Russia has obligation not only to defend Belarus, but also to counterattack if installations on the Belarusian territory are under attack. Then if there is the risk of not being able to contain this limited conflict in the region, it escalates to the north. Russia introduces the bastion concept to strengthen the security of its strategic nuclear potential, which is absolutely necessary to strategic deterrence. And the warring evolution was also indicated by the fact that Russia suspended the CFE treaty, which enables Russia to concentrate forces in any given region close to the borders of NATO countries and exert political military pressure. It reintroduced regular strategic exercises since 2008. It tries to avoid inspections and withdraws from confidence and security building measures through dividing exercises to smaller parts, so they look as if they were training a local conflict, but putting up together, which was very clear during Zapad 2017. You can come to the conclusion that it looks as if the preparation for a large-scale war. And of course, the evolution of Russian military doctrine and investments in military potential, both conventional and nuclear, they were in concert with the attempts of introducing the new security architecture, which is based on the concert of powers. As I said, you could see that after signing the Charter of Paris for the new Europe in 1990, Gorbachev clearly said that he hoped that this agreement will be supported with some other agreements, and maybe the new Security Council for Europe will be established. Then there were a number of proposals. Yeltsin in 93, obviously suggested in a letter to leaders of major powers of establishing of concert of powers. And we come to this proposal of 2008 European Security Treaty, which is available on the internet, only 3 or 4 pages. It's worth checking what it would lead to. Obviously, it would give Russia a veto power, or any other country, to veto the sovereign decisions of other countries if a given country would perceive it as a threat to its security interests. 2015, Vladimir Putin's speech that Yalta agreements from 1945 should be a symbol of stability, treated as a symbol of stability in Europe. It worked fine from Putin's perspective. It's worth to remind Russian president, obviously, that it worked fine because Americans maintained 400,000 troops in Europe, probably, and it didn't work fine for our region. And then in 2015, national security concept, it claims that security architecture based on NATO and EU is non-viable, and creation of an open collective security system in the Euro-Atlantic region based on a clear treaty and legal basis is desired. And the final slide, where does it lead us with this deterrence energy and defense-energy nexus? So we have a major disagreement on the status quo in Europe, completely different situation than it was during the Cold War. And then we have offensive Russian doctrine, wars with Georgia and Ukraine, which de facto established a sphere of influence in the post-Soviet space. The aim to enforce not de facto system, but the Euro system, which is stated in strategic Russian documents, and exercises which may indicate that Russia may have not only capability but an intention to run a conflict with NATO. What are the consequences for NATO and EU? That, of course, we cannot exclude that if something happens, there will be a preemptive attack, that status quo ante, if there is a local conflict, that status quo ante would be brought back in exchange for the negotiations on the new European Security Treaty. And of course, the threat for the border states would appear, both for Poland and Norway. There would be a manipulation of the threat of employing the nuclear weapons. Russia, which also it is written in national security concept, Russia would use strategic deterrence, which is the strategic deterrence term is based on interrelated political, military, technical, diplomatic, and economic and other measures that could be employed. So you cannot exclude that energy as a means of intimidation and coercion would be employed. And of course, energy blackmail could be used against the most dependent countries that are to introduce the divisions across the alliance in Europe. And it is a completely different situation than we had during the Cold War, where Germany, which was the basic line of defense with a huge conventional capability, and the most determined country not to be blackmailed. These days we have the new strategy, NATO strategy, based rather on the reinforcements rather than forward defense. So the viability of this strategy relies on the ability and political will of NATO countries to deploy troops to this region. And this is why the economic pressure and energy blackmail would play a completely different role than it could during the Cold War. So I will end here. Thank you very much, and I am open for the discussion.
Thank you, Wojciech. I will just, for 1 minute, abuse my position as a moderator of this panel and the coordinator of the project. So we've had a lot of discussions about methodology, but about also our findings. So basically, if I could sum up what you presented, Wojciech, is that what unites the Nordic-Baltic region. The Baltic region understood as the states which are in the Baltic Sea basin, and the Nordic region understood as mostly Norway and its shores of the Norwegian Sea, Barents Sea, and the North Sea. What unites the region in terms of threats is the sustained threat coming from the goals of Russian foreign and defense policy. That these goals, as Wojtek presented, have not appeared out of the blue in 2014. They were pursued constantly for a longer time, and they had their political dimension and military dimension. And even if the answer of NATO started in 2014 to this increased threat, the answer which was focused on the Nordic-Baltic region and started with the reassurance, then in Warsaw moved to deterrence, so to deploying NATO assets, multinational battle groups to Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia to deter Russia from any attempts to start a crisis in this region. Even if this is a welcomed development, then the threat is still there. And by the way, there was within the project Karsten Fries from NUPI and Artur Kacprzyk co-authored a paper, a policy paper, strategic file with discussing these issues. So you can find it on both PISM and NUPI websites probably. Even if this is, even if NATO has done a lot, then we need to pursue the adaptation of NATO. We need to focus, as Wojtek said, on reinforcements and the follow-on forces, on the capabilities, and we need to focus on the coherent adaptation of the alliance. In the meaning, and what is important in this coherence from the perspective of the Nordic-Baltic region is that these are the operational links mean basically that there is no security of the eastern flank without security of the, let's say, northern dimension without security of Norway, and vice versa, because of the mechanism which we call and we analyze in the report the horizontal escalation mechanism. It is very likely that in case of a security crisis evolving in the Baltic, around Suwałki Gap, for example, the notorious element of the discussions in NATO today, and for the last couple of years, at least 2 years, then there would be military activities also in the north, including probably also far north, and Norway may be directly affected of that, and vice versa. Even if today we can hardly imagine that a Norwegian-Russian political or economical argument could escalate, then if it happens at some point in the future, then the Baltic region would be affected too. So this is this horizontal escalation mechanism, which links the region and which makes Poland and Norway. And here I'm pointing to our recommendations regarding Polish-Norwegian cooperation. This puts Poland and Norway in a position to jointly argue for a coherent NATO adaptation. But coherence is required also with regards to energy, which is very peculiar in the region and has very strong effects on defense, on the credibility of NATO deterrence and defense policy. But here we have the best author we could imagine. So our NUPI coordinator of this project, Jakub Goźmiłski. Jakub, please share your thoughts with us.
I'll do my best, and I hope very much that my presentation is going to work, both for me and for you. I will pay some attention in my presentation to this Defence-Energy Nexus, approaching the issue from the strategic perspective and focusing this presentation on the strategies of two countries that are the most important suppliers of energy in the region, namely Russia and Norway. And I think that it's good to start with this idea of what this whole nexus is all about. I think that in order to be able to understand the connection between security, national interests, defense, and energy, we need to pay some attention to this concept of grand strategy. grand strategy is about how the states behave in the international system, what kind of objectives they have, what kind of instruments they have at their disposal, what and how those objectives are pursued. And there are hundreds of definitions of grand strategy. I think that this definition by Fever is a very good one. This is about a collection of plans and policies that comprise the state's deliberate effort to harness political, military, diplomatic, and economic tools together to advance the state's national interests. And Gaddis was even more laconic when describing this grand strategy as something that is described as the art of relating all of the means at your disposals to the ends you have in view. Megan O'Sullivan published this book chapter on the entanglement of energy grand strategy and international security that is going to be very much present in my presentation. So this is also some of her ideas that I will share with you. She also defined the energy as the basis of economic growth that can be found at the heart of virtually every country's strategic evaluations. We can only imagine a modern society without access to energy. No smartphones, no iPhones, no TV, no CNN, no BBC, no light, no electric vehicles driving on the streets. So energy is something that we need to function, and it's also why it's so crucial to understand how energy policy forms a part of national grand strategy, meaning how the energy instruments you can have at your disposal can be used in order to promote your long-term and short and mid-term interests, how energy and security are intertwined, which is the topic of the report, and how energy factors into a whole host of interactions between countries, actors, and global institutions. And according to Megan O'Sullivan, energy can be viewed as an end or an objective to be achieved when we have to do, for instance, with an actor like the European Union that has to import more than 50% of its energy, then it's clear that having access to energy in order to function for the EU is one of the strategic objectives. Then we have a situation where energy can be used as a tool of achieving security objectives, and here we can make a lot of references to Russia. I will be more specific later on about Russia using energy directly and indirectly in its foreign and security policy. And then energy resources can be used also as a means of resource for national security strategies, or more broadly for countries that want to achieve the strategic or pursue some of the strategic interests. And Norway can be used here as a very good example of a country that uses its energy resources in order to achieve some long-term goals. When we read about Norwegian economic policy, when we read about Norwegian social policy, we can somehow identify one of the long-term strategic goals. This is about the extension of the lifespan of the Norwegian model of welfare state, where the society can function more or less the same way as it does today, and energy resources are, in that sense, an important tool or means to be used. And this connection between energy and defense and security has also another dimension, because as stated in the article published by a Swedish colleague Johansson in 2013, energy and security is linked in a very specific manner. On the one hand, energy provides us with a number of benefits, but on the other hand, energy can also pose some threats. And here is identified two key questions that have to be addressed when talking about the connection between energy and security and defense. Energy can be viewed as an object exposed to various types of security threats. The whole NATO debate about the need to protect the so-called critical infrastructure feels nicely in this context. It's about protecting critical infrastructure that is important for us to have functioning and working in order to for our societies to be able to function. But energy system can also be something that may generate or enhance insecurity. When we look, for instance, at the situation in Fukushima in 2011, this is a very good illustration of this dimension. Something that has happened in Fukushima, which was a result of a natural catastrophe, created a number of tensions and opinions, and one of the direct results of this accident in Fukushima was, for instance, the German decision on closing down German nuclear power plants by 2022, which is also one of the inputs in the German energy policy that has also some ramifications and some implications for energy security and energy and even defense interconnection in the Baltic region. So we see that energy can be something that can be exposed to various security threats that have to be addressed by, for instance, making Norwegian special forces prepared to protect the energy facilities on the continental shelf, but the energy system can also create some problems in the security field. When we want to understand how energy plays a part in the Russian strategic thinking and in Russian political practices, we have to understand that energy is one of the key elements of the Russian strategic toolbox. In order to illustrate this, I have gone through a number of strategic documents published in Russia since 2000 until 2016, and I identified how many times energy is being mentioned in those documents. And as you see, there is a kind of increasing focus on energy in those Russian strategic documents. We also have to understand that if we want to treat energy commodities and energy resources as a tool, we need also to know something about what the objectives are in the case of Russia. And this is kind of summing up of some studies on Russian strategic objectives in a longer term perspective, starting with a study published in 1962 by Cyril Black, where he identified 4 long-term goals the Russian Empire and the Communist Russia, and most probably the post-Communist Russia, are very interested in achieving through a study published by Rand in 2017 on Russian strategic objectives in the current situation, also supplemented with some thoughts from the paper published by Kadrilik in 2017, where she wanted somehow to identify what does Russia want. And we see that becoming an active participant in the international system and restoring Russia as a great power are topics that are very much present in those official documents and many statements made by Russian politicians. So if we want to understand what is the energy commodities role in this broader strategic Russian context, we need to understand that this is something that has been summed up by Clifford Gaddy and Barry Hicks when they published a paper on Russia's resilience against the sanctions, showing that Russia has been earning a lot of money from energy resources, and those money have been spent on things that have made Russia stronger and more resilient when meeting the international environment and when dealing with the issues that have also some impact on the Western, on relations with the West. So this is important to understand that energy, in the case of Russia, is something that can be used as an immediate direct tool. This is the table on the left side taken directly from the report, where you look at how Russia can use those energy-related instruments in order to pursue its goals internationally. And the one on the left side is about what kind of instruments Russia has in its pursuit of energy-related goals that have also some implications for international position of the country. And it's also very important to understand that even today, energy resources play a major part. Those two graphs show the development of Russian spending on defense-related matters, and the other one is about the importance of revenues generated from production and trade of petroleum resources in the Russian state budget, supplemented with data on defense and security spending and social spending that are two most important from the strategic point of view types of spending in the Russian state budget. The social spending is to secure the stability of the regime. The defense and security spending is to help Russia deal with international objectives as a great power. And this is also this has also been translated directly into the increased military capabilities of Russia, because Russia faced a lot of problems in the 90s. Had it not been for those revenues generated from production and sales of oil and gas, Russia would most probably have a lot of trouble with modernizing its military forces. And this is a very good illustration of the direct and indirect link between energy resources and security. It's about using energy commodities and resources to pursue some short-term goals that have mostly to do with energy-related questions, but it's also about indirect impacts like the issue of rent generation that can be also spent on some other goals that improve Russia's ability to stand against, for instance, external pressures by increasing the capability of the Russian military forces. And this is also a very good illustration of how two countries that have been operating in the same energy market environment been prioritizing. We see that in the case of Russia, the increased revenues from sales and production of oil have been translated into increased focus on security-related matters. It's about Russia spending much more money today on defense and security-related questions than it used to be the case some years ago. And it's also about Norway reducing the level of spending on security-related matters, although the level of revenue per capita generated from energy resources was almost the same, because those two countries have been operating in the same market environment. And when we look at Russian objectives, it's about restoring Russia's status as a great power. When we look at the Norwegian strategic objectives, it's about rent maximization as a strategic objective, because this rent maximization is about making the country able to achieve its long-term goal, namely the extension of the Norwegian model of the welfare state. And the graph at the bottom of this picture shows you a very interesting development. By 2018-19, we will most probably see a situation when revenues generated from the management of the former revenues generated by the Norwegian energy resources is going to be greater than the revenue generated from the operations of the Norwegian oil and gas sector. And I think that this also really shows how the Norwegian and Russian interests do partly overlap and partly are conflicting. This has something to do with the fact that both Russia and Norway operate mostly on the same energy market in Europe. This is an illustration of the importance of Norway and Russia on the European gas and oil market. And I will end up this by saying a few words about what makes Norway a preferable solution for Europe, because this is also about how Norway relates to its allies. And I think that after having gone through this list of strategic objectives and so on, it's important to understand that energy cooperation is not only about providing energy, it's also about building a network of common interests. And I think that Norway has at least a number of competitive advantages compared with some other external suppliers of energy. One of the advantages is the commonality of values, but also the fact that Norway has been a reliable supplier of energy, non-politicizing its energy supplies is also an important element. So I think that I will stop here, and the main takeaway from this presentation is that the relationship between defense, security, and energy is far more complex than we can think. And I think that with this brief presentation, I have put some issues on the agenda, and that we will have a chance to discuss all those issues also in the following 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jakub. Please. Thank you, Jakub. Please take a seat. Join us. If again, I may just give 2 points before this way, giving you time for formulating questions. Then I have to admit that when we started deliberating the Defence-Energy Nexus, so basically deliberating the question how energy affects defense in the Nordic-Baltic region, myself, I had some doubts, because it was for me obvious that energy, meaning gas and oil exports, is used by Russia as one of very many tools to reach its geopolitical goals, if you wish to use this term. But as we get engaged in discussions with various audiences and various analysts here in Norway, but not only, we learned that it may be obvious if you're in Warsaw, if you're a Pole and you know the history of the economic and political dependency on the Soviet Union. And later on, we found that this thinking is shared by all either post-Soviet or countries or the Soviets or former Soviet satellites in the region. But when you go to other countries from the Nordic-Baltic region, then you hear that gas and oil, that this is a market issue, and that it should be, as Jakub said, depoliticized. And that's why we decided that this report has to show not only that there is this link, but also how this link works and how it may work towards the detriment of the NATO credibility of NATO defense and deterrence. And what is a key issue here is the distinction between the price and the costs. We often hear that Russian gas is cheap. That's why it should be the most optimal source for Europe as regards its gas needs. However, we forget in these discussions, and it's not us in Poland, but in many discussions in Europe, let's say, the discutants often forget that this price comes at a political cost, and probably also a defense cost, because dependency may increase the likelihood that in times of a crisis, the decisions of allies would not be as swift and as ambitious as they should be if you want to keep the escalation of the crisis under control on your own terms, not on the terms of your adversary. So basically, this was a great intellectual journey, I have to say, with tremendous authors here. And here I would like to stop and give the floor to you. So please, if you have any question, remarks, comments to the reports, you can refer to what you read in the report. And please to introduce yourself. And I guess there will be microphone in the room over there. So let's start a Q&A. We have more than 15 minutes, so a lot of time, I think. No? Oh, because okay, sorry. I thought you've been waving. Okay, Karsten, please. Okay, and then. Okay.
My name is Haritslev, and I'm here as a person coming in from outside. As there is not anybody else who is asking to put forward a question, I would like to make a comment which might which should lead to a question. I think that your broad outlook was excellent, but I think you stopped at a very particular point, and that is when you were only speaking about energy supplies. What is strategic here, and what is strategic for Russia, and for Norway particularly? That's gas supplies, in fact. Because Russia and Norway are the two main gas suppliers in Europe. And that might have some importance. I also have one other question concerning, so to say, the more military situation in the Baltic. But I would rather prefer to come back to that question, which is more military in effect, but it shouldn't be surprising when I put it forward. But could the questions be elucidated by splitting up the analysis on gas and on oil? Because oil, that's plenty of it, and it's too much. In fact, as the United States is coming forward in the way it is. But gas, particularly in Europe, that is gas.
Maybe we'll take one more from Karsten, and then we'll be back to the podium.
Thank you. My question was somewhat similar to Ron here. I'm not an expert on energy security, but I've been told that compared to some years ago, when it comes to supply of the whole nexus, Jakob, that when it comes to gas supply, there's so much more now on the spot market being sold. So the customers are not so dependent anymore as they used to be, which means gets more flexibility. So this LNG and there's also renewables. So that I've been told that changes the whole kind of dependency security thinking along those lines. But I maybe touched upon it. I didn't get it. There's so many tables there. I didn't get them all. But I'm curious about that, how that impacts security thinking, and if it's true what I just said. Thank you.
Thank you, Karsten. I think that the questions on the gas will go directly to Jakub. This flexibility indeed is something what we covered in the report, because for flexibility for the spot market you need infrastructure. So we mentioned that. But Wojtek, I think that there was also a question regarding the military situation in the Baltic. So if you could maybe understand, look at what is the essence of the threat. So why a limited crisis can end up being something big for credibility of NATO and Article 5. How this may play out. I understand that this could be a question. But first, gas, Jakub, please.
I think that the issue of gas is definitely the key issue in Europe. This has something to do with the fact that most of the gas supplies are provided via relatively rigid infrastructure network, which means that there is no possibility to redirect gas flows to other places. Russia, for instance, has expressed interest in playing a greater part on the Chinese energy market, but this is not going to compete with the supplies to Europe because there is no infrastructure that could be used to supply the gas that today goes to Europe and to redirect this gas to China, for instance. But gas is also the key element in the ongoing debate on security of gas supply in Europe. Boils down to those who express the opinion that the market has been developing in the direction of making the security of gas supply a softer issue to be dealt with because of the building new elements of infrastructure, adding interconnectors, reverse flows, connecting various national markets in a more efficient way, and those who still mean that being too dependent on one or two sources of supply creates that kind of permanent tension and creates a permanent risk. It's also about the fact that some of the countries that those gas supplies are also most probably being used in a more strategic manner. If you look at what are the, for instance, Russian top objectives towards Europe. It's about weakening the internal cohesion of Western institutions, EU and NATO. So by using its gas supplies to undermine this internal cohesion, you achieve two goals at the same time. On the one hand, you become a more important supplier of gas, for instance, to the German market, because if the new Nord Stream is built, then Germany will become more dependent on supplies of gas. Germany will also be given a role of regional European gas hub, which will increase the direct and indirect dependence on supplies from Russia. But since this idea of building Nord Stream is a controversial issue within the European Union and NATO, then the construction will also undermine the internal cohesion of those two institutions, weakening in a way the internal cohesion of Western institutions, which is also one of the strategic goals of Russia. So gas is, on the one hand, there is more security in the gas sector because of the more successful development of the internal market. We have, for instance, seen the situation when 10 years ago Ukraine was completely dependent on gas supplies coming from Russia. Last year Ukraine could import more than 10 billion cubic meters of gas from the other direction due to this development of the market-related infrastructure in Europe. So on the one hand, gas is still a challenge because of this rigid infrastructure. On the other hand, the development of the internal market has removed some of the elements of risk in the market. On top of that, we also see that LNG supplies are going to play a more important role in years to come in Europe, which will also add to this flexibility of the market of the gas market in Europe.
Thank you, Jakub. Wojtek, please.
We found out in our report that this strategic cooperation, Russian-European strategic energy cooperation, that it has potentially disastrous effects for the credibility of NATO in Baltic Sea region, because if we interpret those trends rightly, and if there is a huge strategic goal to impose the new security architecture in Europe, which would be more favorable to Russia, and the way to achieve it goes through limited conflict in the Baltic Sea region, which NATO would be unable to solve through military means, and it would have to go for the negotiations. So the dependence of the Western countries, generally dependence of Germany, which is behind our backs, and Poland and Baltic states rely very much on the ability to reinforce through German territory. And this could be a huge liability. So this is why we try to show that this is completely different situation than it used to be during the Cold War. And obviously, if there is a limited conflict, if Russia miscalculates, if it interprets all those signals, even how the Western countries respond to this poisoning of KGB agent Mr. Skripal, if they misinterpret it as a weakness, as is interpreted as that there are divisions among NATO allies, unfortunately, all in all, increases the likelihood that military means against NATO could be used in future to undermine NATO's credibility. And then we have local conflict when the Western dependency will be used as a coercive method against the West, and a huge risk of horizontal escalation, which will also involve Norway. Obviously, then the threat to energy infrastructure appears as well. Again, a completely different threat to Western countries, which are dependent, and it will be in Russian interest to maintain this dependence, so nobody would try to attack Nord Stream 1 or Nord Stream 2. But infrastructure in Poland, for example, or in Baltic states, just to weaken the resolve of those countries to defend themselves and to increase chances that they will be open for the negotiations on the future status of the future security architecture. That it will also this risk will also rise. Thank you.
I think that it's also important to paint a more nuanced picture, because on the one hand we talk a lot about the West's dependence on supplies coming from supplies of energy coming from Russia. On the other hand, we should also understand that Russia is also to a certain extent dependent on having those supplies traded and on the revenues from sales of those supplies generated and redirected back to Russia. The Russian state budget would not probably survive the collapse of the energy cooperation with the West, according to some studies published recently by the Center of Eastern Studies in Warsaw. Between 70 and 80% of Russian revenues generated from trade in oil, gas and petroleum products comes from Russia's trade with the European Union, meaning that cutting the market relations with the Europe would also have very negative consequences for the Russian state finances. So we have to do with the kind of double independence or interdependence. On the one hand, it's something that should make us less worried. On the other hand, we also know that we have a state leader in Russia that is willing to take some risks more than the leaders we have in the Western capitals, and we have seen situations when Russia was more preoccupied with the kind of strategic calculation having to do with the survival of the regime than with the economic consequences of the decisions being made. A very good example of this is the fact that Russia, for instance, decided to invest something like $50 billion in the Sochi Winter Olympic Games that were to improve Russia's image on the international stage, and then only 3 weeks after the Olympic Games were over, Russia decided to annex a part of the neighboring country, which had a kind of destructive effect on Russia's international image. So this really shows that those calculations are not necessarily made based on purely economic calculations, that also some other issues are at stake when decisions are made in Russia.
Thank you, Jakub. I think we have room for 1 or 2 more questions. Please, gentleman in the back.
Jan Ole Gundersen from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Just one short question about renewables. I think that was mentioned here, but you didn't comment on that. How does renewables fit into the equation?
Renewables?
Yeah, maybe we'll wait for another question. We take it in the bunch.
Yes, sorry. My name is Emil Ove. I used to be affiliated to NUPI. And my question goes more specifically about Nord Stream 2 projects. And how much do you think the added value, the strategic value of that project for Russia, relating that to the question coming from here, taking into account that you are getting more and more with the energy event and everything, that you get more and more less dependent on gas and oil. How important is this project, and is there a lot of added value to it for Russia?
Okay, Jakub, so these are energy questions.
When it comes to renewables are definitely a part of the solution of this energy security dilemma, because renewables are a different sort of energy commodity. It's about renewables being produced and used locally. It's about renewables being produced in a more decentralized manner, which means that the energy infrastructure that is needed in the case supplies of renewables has a completely different set of parameters. It's also about renewables that can be used in order to reduce the level of energy import dependence, because when you build a solar panel in Germany or a wind power farm in Germany, then you make Germany less dependent on external suppliers of energy. So renewables are definitely a part of the solution. It's also about how we define question of energy security. Traditionally, when we think about energy security, we think about security of supply for the countries that need to import energy. It's about the price. It's about the access to energy. It's about security of demand for the countries that export energy. It's about the acceptability of the energy. And the issue of acceptability has very much to do with the issue of sustainability of the energy system we have and we want to have. And the issue of renewables has very much to do with this question of acceptability and sustainability, because in a country like Poland, for instance, I made some noise at the conference some months ago in Warsaw, and I asked a question about the question was the following. As far as I know, the supplies of Russian gas to Poland have not yet resulted in any deaths in the Polish society, while the use of Polish coal is quite often blamed for between 30 and 40,000 additional death cases per year in Poland. So when we redefine the way we understand energy security, it's when it's not about it's not only about and access to energy, but it's also about the effects the access to various types of energy have on the society, then this question of renewables becomes even more important. We know that the focus on renewables is to a very large extent coming from this concern for climate change and the negative effect of the current energy use on climate, which may have some disastrous effect for the whole society. So this question of renewables has many dimensions. On the one hand, it's a way of making countries less dependent on external supplies of energy, but it's also about addressing and mitigating the risk of climate change that can have also disastrous effects on various types of societies.
Thank you, Jakub. Wojciech, would you like to few last words on this panel?
Just very briefly on renewables. That obviously for Poland, you know, to be able to rely on renewables would be a blessing, and it would take out us from geopolitical trap probably. But we don't have, you know, this capacity to rely on renewables, unfortunately. That's the one thing. The other thing, I'm not an expert on energy, but we had some analysis that it seems that capacity of Germany to import gas would even reach some 300 billion cubic meters. That if they are going to be a hub, and there is this supplier that is able to provide gas for 250 years at the current rate of import, so it is an incentive to rely to some extent, which can be interpreted as strategic, and it will influence the political elites, it will influence the public opinion, it will influence the perception. And for Russia, obviously, and it's nothing surprising if during the Cold War their interest was to keep Germany as weak as possible and to secure the political influence on German political elites. And those calculations were even in 60s when during Gorbachev and during Khrushchev and then during Brezhnev, they calculated that sooner or later they will not be able to stop the reunification of Germany. So we need to find a way how to build this, you know, Russian, that time Soviet, German axis, how to have some influence on German politics. And now we can see this introduced in practice. So from the German perspective, and again, it's nothing surprising, if you think in geopolitical terms, you need at one hand you need to introduce the new security architecture that Germany and US were the biggest proponents of in Europe, and the enlargement of stability further to the east, but at the same time to create this huge space of common interest with Russia, just to give to Russia an incentive that it doesn't come back to revanchist and politics, so it does not create a threat. Unfortunately, it did not work, and we are at this situation now that Russia is playing geopolitics. It tries to impose the sphere of influence, not by occupation of direct occupation of whole countries, but it is trying to reimpose the sphere of influence in the post-Soviet space, and it is trying to reimpose the buffer zone in our region, and the direct way to it is through this geopolitical project of having a new security treaty in Europe, which would be not only detrimental for our region, but it would be detrimental for Sweden and Finland as well, which would have a direct strategic consequences for Norway. Thank you.
Thank you, Wojciech. Well, to make room for the discussion on Nord Stream, I think we'll move to the second part, so which Jakub will moderate. So I guess you will have a chance to comment on that. I think that this is already a third presentation of this report. We had one in Warsaw with the diplomatic corps and the ministers, Polish-Norwegian ministers, and we had one in Lublin, an academic city in eastern Poland, and all presentations were different. So if I would were to seek a word to sum up what my colleagues said today, is the keyword would be interdependence. The interdependency which Jakub mentioned between Russia and Europe on the gas supplies is a tricky one, because on the one hand Russia is dependent on the revenues. On the other hand, it spends these revenues from gas and oil exports to increase its military capability, which threatens NATO and threatens the region. At the same time, it uses this interdependency also to involve politics and business of some selected states into its own let's say business projects, so that this relation is not only about cutting supplies but about using the leverage it has into influence politics of different countries. And further, this interdependency looks differently when it comes to post-Soviet space and former Soviet satellites, and it is different when we talk about countries like Germany. But the interdependency is also, or can be built further between Poland and Norway if the Baltic Pipe project is pursued and finalized. And this, I feel, interdependency can be to a large extent a cure to the problems stemming from the energy and defense links in the region, and the way how energy affects the regional security to its detriment. And this is, I think, a conclusion which immediately brings us to the discussion, this being the second part of today's seminar, which will take more upon Poland and Norway agenda for cooperation in defense, in energy, in the region. This will be led by Jakub, but please, before we change the decoration on the podium, please join me in thanking both Jakub and Wojciech.
And we still owe you the answer to the question on the Nord Stream, and I think that we will start the second panel with me asking Bartosz for this answer, and we will be joined by Karsten Fries, our second NUPI colleague, who is going to pay some attention to the security-related aspects of this possible cooperation. So, since we have not answered this question on the Nord Stream, I think that I would like to ask Bartosz for sharing some thoughts on the Nord Stream, seen from the Warsaw perspective, seen from the Moscow perspective. I have already mentioned that this project is not only about gas supplies, it's also about undermining the internal cohesion of the Western institutions. It's about Russia using the rule and the divide and rule approach towards various countries. It's about Russia trying to strengthen its economic and thus political connection to Germany. that is a kind of European economic powerhouse. It's about the German political and economic elites still dreaming about Russia becoming a huge market for German goods and so on and so on. So, but Bartosz, please say a few words about all those, or at least some of the aspects of the Nord Stream.
Thank you very much. So, as for Nord Stream 2, first of all, maybe obvious point, but it's good to start from it that Nord Stream 1 and 2 are a realization of Russia's long-term goal to sidestep Ukraine as a transit countries, and this was goal of Russia from the very beginning of the 90s. After the dissolution of Soviet Union, Russia lost its control on its pipelines, its storage facilities. So its goal was to gain direct connection with its customers, or in the worst scenarios, to get control over transit countries or transit infrastructure. That's one point. And another one we have already mentioned about interdependence that is built when such projects as Nord Stream 2 are created. So if we talk about interdependence between Russia and Europe, if we take a look at Russian strategic export infrastructure, it builds relations between Russia and NATO and EU members, which Russia sees as enemy or adversary. And on the other hand, if we look at strategic import infrastructure of NATO members, let it be Polish LNG import terminal or Lithuanian LNG import terminal or Baltic pipe, these are either facilities that can be attacked by Russia or sabotaged during the conflict, and they build interdependence within NATO alliance. So in the event of any conflict between Russia and the West, Russian strategic infrastructure is secured because of interdependence with Germany or Western countries, and strategic infrastructure of countries in the Baltic Sea region is easy target for Russia. So this interdependence plays a positive role rather for Russia than for West.
Since Bartosz has mentioned this issue of protection of the critical infrastructure, Karsten, you have been studying Norwegian foreign and security policy, and when working on this project, I tried to get a better understanding of how this issue of the protection of critical infrastructure fits into the Norwegian thinking about security of the country. And I have been a little bit puzzled by the fact that, for instance, critical infrastructure, critical energy infrastructure is not defined as part of the critical infrastructure within the law on security that is still valid in Norway. How this question of protection of critical infrastructure is a factor that also has some impact on Norwegian thinking about security and defense issues. Earlier today we had this session with Ivar Neumann, and Ivar Neumann put this question on the agenda in the 90s, saying that one of the goals of the Norwegian military should be the protection of the critical infrastructure, petroleum infrastructure on the continental shelf. To what extent this is still the case?
If I may, Jakob, I will, before I answer a question, I kind of plan a little three-step before I reach to what I want to do to address, which is exactly your question, if I may. Because I just wanted to underline the context here. We're talking about security, we're talking about Russia and our relation with Russia. And I think it's important just to refer to Wojciech's initial briefing here, that what has changed since the Cold War. I think there are 2-3 things we need to keep in mind. First of all, the Baltic states are parts of NATO, which means that any reinforcement, any conflict will involve us all. We cannot kind of look the other way. Sweden cannot look the other way either. Secondly, missile range, we can be reached from the whole Baltic area can be reached from the north, from the Arctic, and vice versa with the missile technology that Russia has. And we've seen in recent exercises, the Russian Zapad exercise that was also mentioned, that although it was only an exercise for the central, the Western military district, they also sent a lot of troops to the northern Norway. Actually, the highest concentration of troops ever in the Kola Peninsula since the end of the Cold War. It was, airborne forces, mechanist brigade, and even Iskander missiles, which are dual use. They can use nuclear missiles as well. So this is one geopolitical space. So that's a kind of backdrop. I just want to stress that because I think it's important. And in that, of course, as you also said, the NATO coherence, and we wrote about in this paper, which is part of this project, is of course very important because it is. Sorry, I lose all my papers. Because it is about reinforcement. The whole NATO strategy is based very much on reinforcement and to be able to kind of penetrate through potential Russian defense systems in the Kaliningrad and other places. So the whole credibility of NATO is about actually our solidarity, that we can stick together, and we will support each other, and if it's credible reinforcement, and in this, and I'm coming to the point here with the whole energy security, as again Wojciech pointed out, there's a whole tool in the toolbox, a range of tools in the toolbox, where energy is one of them, right? But what we have been studying in our report is, in a recent report here, is about potential hacking of gas export, right? We've seen what Russia does in Ukraine, hacking in the electrical grid there, but we did a study of the potential hacking of the Norwegian petroleum sector. And the point is that, as you alluded to, Jakob, or it's said that the Norwegian petroleum sector is in private hands, therefore it's not under this national security, critical security legislation, and therefore it's really up to the companies how they protect it. It is a very kind of complicated legal issue. My point, I think, in a more general term, is that we have to think about security, not to turn out only about blowing up pipelines. At least not in the physical sense. They can be blown up by hacking as well, or that can be sabotaged by hacking as well. And it's much easier than sending special forces out or somebody else to kind of blow up things, because you can basically do it from where you sit. And some of you might see in this, video from the guy in Ukraine who's in the control center of the electrical system. It sees his mouse is moving, but he's not touching his mouse because it's a hacker sitting somewhere in Russia doing it and basically turning off electricity in half the country, right? So this is the kind of way to think in new way. We have to expand our idea about the threat picture also when it comes to energy security. It can be the first. I would argue one of the first, if its political tension increases, I think the potential of hacking is quite high. It's one of the first areas that things might happen. It must be the first domain that's being used for warfare, so to speak, right? Because it's relatively easy and it's a certain level of deniability. It wasn't us, it was an accident, whatever, right? And in that context, there's a thinking in Norway of maybe introducing petroleum sector in the national security as well, but we'll see where that ends.
Agnieszka, you have been studying Russian foreign and security policy for some time, doing a lot of interesting stuff. How do you see this question of energy security, the connection between energy and security for a country like Russia that is a huge producer and exporter of energy commodities? It's most obvious question to have some state structures that take care of the security of the whole sector, and we have seen the lot of things happening there with people moving between Russian security structures and Russian energy companies, like in the case of Rosneft, for instance. How do you see the importance of this energy sector in the broader strategic context in Russia, and how this may impact on Russia's choices in foreign and security policy?
Thank you, Jakub. Thank you for the invitation. I like Oslo very much. It's my first trip here. I was not author of this report. I was more reviewer to this report. And thank you for the invitation as a partner of this project. Answering your question, I would back to your first question from the audience about Nord Stream. I would even be more precise than Bartosz, or more stronger, because first, what I need to mention before I will arguing about Russia, we must see that Germany is a very important player in the European Eastern policy. But saying that, we also need to understand that according to Nord Stream 2, actually it's some kind of, from Germany perspective, it's a commercial project to cut off Ukraine as a transportation player country, as Bartosz said. But saying more directly, Germany would like to sell Ukraine Russian gas. And be something like burping, because Russia is seen as a non-predictable player, because it cuts off gas supplies to Europe in 2006, in 2009, but after that, Germany is a predictable player, it's inside European Union, and will not allowed in such cases. So building a gas hub, like Wojtek said, is saying, taking more than its needs, actually it's trying to be a supplier for other countries, and especially, and also Ukraine. So we see some kind of reverse in this energy and some kind of interconnection between Russia and Germany cooperation, which is understandable from the position of commercial. But Russia is not commercial player. It's a geopolitical player. And we in Poland, we do understand that very well. But in the Western countries, we see and we talk to experts and to people, it's more that Western countries sees profits from the market. And the profits from the market are obvious. But building its position in the market, using the market tools, Germany will also need the cheaper Russian gas, which is very dangerous from our position, from geopolitical position, because when we would see Russia as a commercial player, it would never cut off its supplies to Europe. Yeah, it's a logic, from the perspective of the market, and what we also said before, that revenues, it's a fundamental part of its budget. So from the commercial point of view, it's not logical. But if we see Russia's strategy in the foreign policy and using energy as a tool of influence, we do see very direct interests of Russia. First of all, protection of its sphere of influence, which is definitely Ukraine, but not only because of the system, which is also very important, that Maidan could brought something very dangerous for the elite in Russia, but also before Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, hopefully there will be no 2, but before Nord Stream 1, 80% of energy supplies went through Ukraine. So Ukraine is fundamental country in the geopolitical sphere of influence for Russia. There is no other country so important for Russia as Ukraine. But nevertheless, we would also, from the, let's say, not only commercial logic, but also some kind of Western logic, we do not understand such an action like aggression in Ukraine, in Donbass, and annexation of Crimea. But we cannot, I mean, we can understand Russians, but we need to understand them, why they are doing what they do, actually. And from Russia perspective, is the most important also energy security, because we are saying that we need to supply Europe with energy, but also Russia needs demand. And demand is what you already asked in your question. The gas, long-term gas, is, I think, 20% now of Russia contracts. So also Russia needs new markets and credibility. I think that Germany would give such a thing like credibility of Russia and predictability, if I may summarize it like this. Thanks.
I think that this whole issue of Nord Stream and Russian-German relations should be seen in a broader context. It's when the Soviet Union collapsed, Germany and many other countries, Norway included, have embarked on the policy of engaging Russia in a positive manner, meaning that, and the idea was, and the idea and the dream was that was expressed also by the former Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Johan Garster. He said once that his dream is to see one day, wake up one day and see Russia being a big Sweden, meaning that the country we have a neighborhood we are neighbors with, but a country that is based on the same set of values and norms as we are, Russia becoming a member of this family of liberal democracies. And had Russia been developing and had Russia developed in that way, then the issue of energy dependence on Russia would not be on the agenda, because I haven't seen any analysis written in Berlin, London, Brussels, or Warsaw that, for instance, Norwegian gas and oil supplies are bound with any sort of geopolitical risks. It's about some commercial activities, it's about some market-related questions, but not at all any geopolitical issues. So had Russia been able to develop into a normal liberal democracy, then this issue of energy dependence on Russia would not come on the agenda. And one of the ways of pushing Russia into this liberal democracy direction was to enter into various forms of cooperation with Russia. And in German, they have even coined a concept of Annäherung durch Verflechtung, meaning rapprochement through intertwining, through cooperation. And energy cooperation, that was the backbone of Russian interaction with the West, was definitely viewed not only as a way of getting Russian energy supplies, but also as a way of influencing the direction of the development in Russia. And what happened in 2014 had a devastating impact on those people who dreamt about Russia becoming a liberal democracy. Now we know that Russia is not going to become a liberal democracy anytime soon, but this thinking about the need to interact with Russia in order to be able to push Russia in the right direction is still very much there. And on top of that come also clearly economic interests of the number of German sectors, the chemical industry, energy sector, and so on and so on. So we have a situation when there is a sort of inertia in the thinking about how to influence Russia, and then there are also those very clearly economic interests that still make German business community interested in having this cooperation with Russia. On the other hand, the realities have changed. Russia in the 90s was viewed in Germany as a kind of promised land where there were 150 million customers waiting for for German cars and other goods, and Russia was viewed as an important strategic partner. But today, for instance, when you compare the level of trade between Germany and Poland, it's much bigger than between Germany and Russia, meaning that from a kind of both economic and strategic perspective, Poland should be treated in Germany as a more important economic partner than Russia. But still, there is this also political dimension. I think it also has something to do with the German feeling of guilt for the Second World War and so on and so on. So Russia has a special position on the German map of mental and interest map. And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I mentioned the issue of Norway adopting this very same set of policies as Germany. So, Karsten, if you could say a few words about how the Norwegian understanding of Russia as a partner has evolved over the past years.
I'd kick my finger because I would like to challenge a little debate, if I may. And I want to follow up on the renewables because I think, and I want to ask again because I'm a little bit outside this field, but it seems like, I don't know how to frame it, but if you look strategic about these issues, of course the only solution is renewable, because you get, as you said and others said, that's detachable. But I think some of the reply, I don't remember who said it, but it was a little bit like we don't have the capacity for that in Poland or something like that. But I mean seriously, if you, and I know I challenge my Polish friends here. If you're really concerned about dependency from Russia when it comes to energy, why isn't there a huge political efforts? That means taxation policies. That means that you know put taxation on gas or on other carbon things. You put the taxes down on renewables, like Germany does, you know. And even in Norway, when we don't have much, you know, we are lucky to have all the hydroelectric power, but we have a very, excessive taxation policy that makes we have the highest Tesla density in the world, right? And we do things like that which is not for geopolitical reasons behind it, but it's possible. With political will, you can do things. So my question to my Polish friends, and it could be anyone basically, if this is really seriously, why don't you really make an effort, follow Germany's path and really have an effort to making, renewables much more important? Who takes the challenge?
I think Bartosz takes the challenge. And the mic.
So, Polish push for renewables, yeah? Okay, so just one comment on Germany's pursuit of green economy. I'd like to stress out that after phasing out nuclear energy and the same policy for coal, the natural gas is perfect backup for renewables. So actually, these are the arguments we hear in Germany, that they need more of Russian gas because they are developing renewable energy and they phased out nuclear energy. And as for Poland, I think I have impression that there are some changes already going on, and Polish energy strategy is hopefully published within few months. So let's wait and see it. And also, just from the recent weeks, Statoil already entered Polish wind projects on the Baltic. So I think green energy definitely will be developed in Poland in the coming years. On green energy?
I'm not an expert with green energy, so I would just accept and argue that yes, we do need it, but we also need some time for coal production, how to deal with this, let's say, problem, because our energy supplies are not divided as we supposed to have. It's on the agenda, I suppose.
We still have some time. Maybe there are some questions from the
question about Nord Stream 2. You said it. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. Coming back to Nord Stream 2, I think you said something about maybe it will not be finalized. What would it take to stop it, or what would need to happen in Germany, for instance?
Yeah, I know that my colleagues would like to say because they were writing report. Okay, but I think that Germany already changed a lot their view on Russia. I agree with Jakob that Germany pursued Russia as a chance. Now they see that it's some kind of threat for and challenge for Europe. But on the other hand, there is a huge lobby to build the Nord Stream 2. I think the huge pressure from NATO, from other countries from European Union can be helpful. But on the I know that a few days ago, 5 countries from the Central Europe signed the document that they are against of Nord Stream 2. Unfortunately, it's only the nearest country to Russia, and it really has no impact, I suppose, to Germany inside. I believe that the most important thing is as the regulation from European Union. But I think that the more competent on Nord Stream 2 would be Bartosz, right?
Okay, I can see there are big challenges for us. I mean, making Russia liberal democracy, stopping Nord Stream 2, and so on and so forth. So let me start from Nord Stream 2. Indeed, this project would be really, or will be very hard to stop. However, I think there's a chance for this, but only because of a combination of several factors, like a new Danish law and blocking Nord Stream 2 within Denmark waters, like the need of application of EU energy law to this, and the threat of US sanctions. So I would say that such business threats, because Western companies see this as a business project. So if you are planning such huge investment, you always need, and you work on the free market and competitive basis, always you need to get this into account. So I think this is not a single act or even open letter could stop this, but rather such combination of threats.
If I may add a few words, we know that the gas market is undergoing huge transition itself. It's about gas market becoming more global than regional. And when we look at previous strategic projects having to do with gas that were stopped, like for instance the development of the Stockman gas field, then it was mostly market forces that played a major part in this project being put on ice. And I think that maybe this may also have some impact on the decision on Nord Stream, although I still think that the push for this is very strong. And this also shows the lack of consequence in the German policy. On the one hand, there is the decision on the German government to allocate something like 2 billion euro to help Ukraine deal with various issues. And on the other hand, if the decision on Nord Stream is made and Nord Stream is built, then Ukraine is going to be the 2 billion euro are going to disappear from the Ukrainian state budget due to the lack of transit fees in the budget. So there is a kind of puzzling logic in the German approach. On the one hand, they decide to build something that will remove 2 billion US euro, and then on the other hand, they give the same amount of money to Ukraine. Karsten, if you have a question.
Now I would like to ask you a question on the renewables, because we didn't really touch this issue in the report, like we didn't touch the general question of the Polish energy mix. We focused on the Nordic-Baltic security this time, with the focus on gas. But tell me if I'm wrong. But as far as I understand, a part of the German Energiewende is that they go from the nuclear energy to renewables, to green technologies. But at the same time, their German requirement, the need for gas is increasing, because you need a kind of a resource to fill the gaps in which the renewable simply does not work. I'm not the expert on this, but from what we had the discussion, I had the impression that going green and developing renewables means that you will need, at least as a kind of a bridging solution, more gas, simply to produce electricity. So if we speak about also electric mobility, so the idea to have more greener, more green transport using electric engines, we would need more electricity produced. In Poland, we have the debate for years, if not decades now, if we should go towards nuclear power station 1 or 2. I don't know what is the current status of that. But in Germany, we know that the decision, and probably Germany will be followed also because of the COP 2015 Paris Agreement, that the European Union will go down into emissions. So it is a long-standing goal, but it means for me that there will be more and more gas needed. So renewables, I don't know, are they really an answer to the interdependency problem, to the dependency on a single supplier? I would like to hear some comments on that. It's off topic a bit, but very worthwhile to discuss. Thank you.
So renewables, surely this kind of energy is not silver bullet for all these problems. It may be part of solution, but as I've already told, renewables need some backup capacity, which can be guaranteed by natural gas. On the other hand, if we look at Germany, everyone is talking about development of electric vehicles, but if we look what diesel industry is saying, they are currently working on decarbonization of the engine, and they think about using natural gas or biogas in the cars. On the other hand, the CNG and LNG filling stations are developing rapidly in Germany, also by Gazprom Germania. So that's another part of this big picture. On the other hand, the natural gas, or namely LNG, will be more popular in maritime transport soon because of environmental regulations. So yes, gas for sure. In midterm, natural gas will play a crucial role for energy mix in Europe. As for long-term goal, this is not. We cannot be sure if it can be replaced by some kind of biogas or synthetic gas. But as for now, I think the economic calculation is clear. And also, I also wanted to stress out that one of Nord Stream 2 participants, Austrian OMV, also contracted some liquefied natural gas from US. So this is also very telling. Thank you.
I just want to add, and again, I'm not an expert, so this is based on what I read. That's not an expert, but from what I read, yes, of course, in a transitional period. But the question of the amount of renewables in European energy in the future is a purely political question, isn't it? At the beginning, because it's about incentives. And then after a while, becomes commercially viable. And as I understand, again, based on what I read in newspapers, so is that this transition goes faster than expected. It is the solar panels, other things are much cheaper producing. They produce more energy now. The battery capacity, everything is happening very quickly in this sector. So I wouldn't rule out energy revolution happening faster than we think. But again, it requires some political will and investment to make that happen. So if I was Statoil, I wouldn't be too relaxed about having secure demand for the rest of the year. Maybe that's why they want to change the name as of this morning into something without oil in it.
Carsten, since you are here and we have paid a lot of attention to the energy-related questions, but when we look at this report, the defense part was also very important. And I think that when we have you here, we should also use this opportunity to make you tell us how a country that has a border with Russia that is on the 14 kilometers shorter than the Polish one has managed to redefine its relations with Russia in a completely different manner than Poland. So could you say a few words about the changing perception of Russia as a source of strategic challenge in the Norwegian thinking about the evolution of the Norwegian military system? We know that there is a lot of debate now about where the Norwegian forces are to move, how to develop the whole system, how to pay attention to Army, Navy, and Air Force. Could you say a few words about the impact of the Ukraine crisis on the Norwegian thinking about defense and security?
I think our previous defense minister said it very clearly. There's a new normality out there, and we don't expect it to change back to the old normality very soon. The challenge, of course, it's this whole generation of people who worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, and other places who built a career on building friendship with Russia. And they get personally upset after Crimea, and became and someone want to try to regain it. Others became maybe more hawkish than others. The point is that when it comes to defense, yes, you have a clear idea about what the purpose of having armed forces is, and we had in the Cold War, because it was all expeditionary and doing things out there. And Afghanistan, it was difficult to explain to people why we had to die in Afghanistan. It's much easier to explain why we had to defend our own territory, of course. It's kind of the whole debate kind of came back to collective defense, and Norway had been arguing for that for a long time, and we one of the main champion voices in NATO for return to Article 5. And as you may know, since so-called new members, I'm sorry, we still been called that with Poland and Baltic states and Central Europe. There were no defense plans of our so-called new allies. Because it was announced to do the Navy. So we have a collective defense organization that doesn't have plans to defend itself. All that is being done and fixed now, and Norway has been pushing very hard for that. And one of the things that we have been pushing particularly hard for is that about reinforcement across the Atlantic. Because, of course, it doesn't help to have a few tripwire forces here if there's nobody else to follow up the threat, right? The whole idea about our very modest presence in Poland and the Baltic states with a few hundred troops is that there are different nations with different flags on the uniform, so that in case there is an attack, there will all be blood from all of us, so to speak, and therefore we will all be politically committed. That is the cruel reality of a tripwire force. Well, that doesn't help if there's nobody to follow up, right? So that has been important from Norwegian point of view. One thing I would like to add, Norway has, the point with a small nation with a small defense structure is that there's only so much you can do. You made some decisions about investments, like we made a decision to buy the F-35 fighter jets long before Crimea, and we started to buy new frigates. And then we basically spent most of the money. There is not much more to play with. So we can although the world has changed, there's not so much really can do. It's a small adjustments here and there to make the army in particular to make it fit. But still, the army is a joke. It's not really a brigade. It's really small. We have basically three battalions. So it's really, really small, and it's not much you can do differently. But one thing I would like to say, which is a project I'm working on now, which I think is sinking in. The fact that the Baltic states are part of NATO makes Sweden an indispensable partner in case of conflict. NATO has to use Swedish territory in case of conflict. It's unavoidable. And therefore we have this enhanced partnerships and all that stuff. But what we're doing now in Nordic cooperation is the easy access to each other's air bases in peacetime without weapons, but that is kind of pushing it, you know, and maybe later on with weapons on the planes, and it's a bit legal thing. But then everybody wants to expand that involves Sweden and Finland as much as possible, irrespective of membership. Because they know that in case of conflict, they cannot stay out, they cannot opt out. Maybe Finland could, in theory, but Sweden cannot for sure, and they know that. They know that very well. They are basically part of NATO without being part of NATO. And that requires us to think a little bit differently. And it returns back to our also Polish-Norwegian agenda here. We need to involve them as much as possible in training and exercise. That talk about Sweden and Finland. We need to make sure that they are interoperable, so that if and when things should happen, they are at least capable to cooperate with us and function with us. That's an interesting development which happens kind of below the political threshold NATO debates in Sweden. But I think that's something about, again, looking at the map and looking at the range of weapons and looking at the kind of the geopolitical necessities of security in our part of Europe, makes us, makes us think a little bit in a new way than we did before. So I guess that's my main contribution of insights, if I may say so. Thank you.
Thank you, Karsten. We still have something like 10 minutes. If there are any questions from the audience, I will be glad to take them. If not, we may have some concluding remarks. Martin has one question.
Well, Karsten, using this opportunity, I would also like to ask you a question more NATO-focused, if I may. A more NATO-focused question. There is the NATO command structure going on. We have the decision about new commands, one for the North Atlantic, and at the same time we know that there is a shortage of resources in NATO to as regards manning of the existing elements of NATO command structure, and basically also involving this into exercises. It will, frankly speaking, cost a lot of money. So there are here and there, you can you can be exposed to comments that basically you may start to have at some point a kind of bad competition, detrimental to NATO, about between not East and South, as we talked about it along, and I think we kind of solved this issue. Partially, Russia helped to solve us eastern flank, southern flank division, because now Russia is everywhere and is detrimental to the security situation both in the eastern flank and in the southern flank. I speak about Syria, of course. But now speaking about with the return of the focus on the good gap, on the North Atlantic, maybe the far north. So now the question is whether, again, the only reinforced, just reinforced, we've just done this, eastern flank, may be kind of a competition to the NATO focus on North Atlantic or on the far north. How would you answer to this kind of comments and questions? This is not my question, this is something what I've been encountered with, so to say, and it puzzles me a little bit and makes me think about this northern dimension of NATO, which has been long kept under the threshold of visibility. Also, it was Norwegian interest. Now it's coming back. And to finish with a proper short question: will this new focus not lead into new tensions in the alliance? Does Norway and other countries want to refocus NATO fully there, and how it links with the eastern flank? Thank you.
So you're saying northern flank versus eastern flank? Is that in a nutshell, right? Yeah, that's new to me. That is like because as I said, I mean, eastern flank, if we need the northern flank for reinforcement, it's to be done very simple, right? So I don't see the point in that, and the resources in the headquarters and other things is kind of limited, and it's too nitty-gritty. I don't know exactly how that is. And we haven't decided where it's going to be yet, and apparently it's going to be where there's already is an headquarters. So, but maybe what I could add is that, of course, Norway has always been a reluctance in Norway to bring NATO too much to the north. We are NATO in the north, and right, that's a slogan of Norway. And the whole point of that is that because of the recognition of the sensitivity from the Russian point of view of the second strike capabilities of what weapons they have up there, to have too many Americans and British and others playing around up there, they wouldn't like that. So we do it, and we share intelligence, and we so we kind of conduct that, and that's kind of stabilizing. So in Norway, it has a kind of a schizophrenic approach. On the one hand, we want to have lots of allied activity, visits, things going on. At the same time, we don't want NATO to kind of push it too back. I mean, we want still the NATO map in Brussels to include Norway. In the 90s was a story that they cut the map half in through Norway in the NATO map in Brussels. We don't want it that little. We want it to be on the map. But I think there's a concern about it's a balancing act there. With the Trident Juncture coming up this fall, the big NATO exercise is about 50,000-60,000 troops. Of course, North going to be very much on the agenda during that exercise. So I think the Norwegian strategy is to keep it on the agenda without making it kind of a permanent structural resource demand. We don't have bases. We don't have permanent foreign bases. We didn't ask for anything like that. So. My answer is basically it's a balancing act that Norway always has been doing, and I think it will continue to do so. But again, I haven't heard the concern that you pointed to, so it's a bit difficult for me to address it more specifically.
Yeah. So. On the comments, we went to defense agenda. Before I started working in PISM, I was working at National Defense University for many years, and I will start with a story. It's not an anecdote, actually. So a few years ago, I was asked to have a meeting with Russians. Generals, and we're supposed to talk about trust, especially about the agenda of building a measure of trust, because Russia did not want to be part of the CFE agreement and withdraw its membership from it. What brought the inability to see the transparency of Russia army, that any inspections of Russian, we could not see what they do. And we were arguing that we're supposed to, if we want to build a trust, first step, we need to see what you are doing. And actually, they said, okay, we will ask you to come to our in our field, but at the end of the story, at the end when we stop reforming our army, and actually it was January on 2014. We haven't had an opportunity to see how they moderate their army, because we already saw it in Ukraine. So this is something what I want to point out, that building trust with Russia is a very hard and complex agenda. I think the most important thing is to build the credibility of NATO, and to opposite your Norway agenda, we do feel that we need to have a stronger alliance in eastern flank, stronger here in Poland. And I understand the balancing agenda, how to deal with Russia. But we are actually, maybe we have the same amount of border, but actually we are in the different place. And we have slightly different history, and also Russians use it, the narrative that we are Russophobic, that all we do it's Russophobic because we born and we already hate Russia. It's not true because we do like Russians. They are very similar to us as a people, but we do not feel and. They vote who they think they should vote, let's say like this. But the meaning is that the system is danger. The elite, which would like to preserve its power, it's a danger for it's a danger for also for NATO. And at the end of the story, actually, we do need to have a dialogue with Russia and somehow balancing this threat, but still. Take into memory that in the one side they say, yes, we build trust, but the other side they're preparing for the war. Thanks.
Bartosz, some final comments.
Okay. Okay. Quick comment on Russophobia then. So also speaking about Polish approach and general approach to Russia by Central European countries. This is, as Agnieszka already mentioned, Russia adopted strategy to label Poland as Russophobic. But however, from the perspective of energy cooperation, if you look at the long list of market abuses, political blackmail, some package deals, and so on and so forth, you can easily find out that the countries from the Central Europe, including Poland, were subject of such abuses by Russia, while countries of like Germany or Netherlands or France never been subject of such energy blackmail. So this is not some kind of Russophobia, but kind of properly recognizing Russia's actions in the region. That's one point. Another one, as for areas of cooperation, Poland have history of energy dependence, of being dependent on Russia supplies, and it was already briefly mentioned that Norwegian income from oil and gas helps to build welfare of the society, while in the Russia's case it helps to expand military build-up. So we pay Russia money, which Russia uses to invest in its army, and then we also have to invest more in our military forces. On the other hand, EU-Russia interdependence in energy sector led to European Commission's investigation of market abuses, which is currently underway. And on the other hand, the decades of EU-Norway cooperation in energy sectors helped to build rules-based trade and market solutions. So that's a really huge difference. And as for building interdependence and changing your partners through economic links, the result of of almost 30 years of building economic relations with Russia are not so positive. Not only we didn't change Russia in a positive way, but Russian money changed the way Europe is working. I mean, you have corruption there. You have another tool of pressure by Russia, which limits possible political response by West. So I would start not necessarily from making Russia liberal democracy, but let's start from making a predictable partner which doesn't use military means to achieve political goals. And I hope that Polish-Norwegian cooperation will help us to build rule-based energy and gas market in the region, because we have so much common areas of cooperation like Baltic pipe, LNG, LNG deliveries, and also Polish oil and gas champions are present on Norwegian continental shelf. So that's the good area of cooperation. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bartosz. You have, okay, Wojtek, this is the last question or maybe even the last comment.
It will be just a comment because UK did not come up in this discussion very much, but it would be worth noting that Theresa May yesterday said that UK would be also considering cutting down the gas imports from Russia as a response. So even if it's only 10% dependency, so it did come up. So even if UK is only relies in 10% or something like that on imports from Russia, it seems that they are aware that it creates some dependency and it can influence political.
Maybe it was Norway who did it.
Sorry?
Maybe it was Norwegians who did it to increase market.
Maybe. And today we have the response of Russian energy minister that it would be obviously a political motivated decision. So, thank you.
Okay, I think that this is a nice conclusion of this event. We still see some issues to be dealt with. Bartosz and many others have identified what is the problem with Russia. We know what we want Russia to be, but we don't know how to make it happen. And I think this is also a very good opening for the next phase of cooperation between PISM and NUPI. We will do our best in order to get some funding for other types of projects, and with that note, on that note, I would like to conclude this seminar and thank you for your patience, for being with us and having this very exclusive, as it seems, possibility to be a part of this conversation. And we look very much forward to more events of this type, both in Warsaw, in Oslo, and in some other places. And thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for taking part in this project. And with that, I declare the project for being concluded.